Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is our first Friday Focus talk of 2025. Friday Focus is the online talk series hosted by the Hunterian. And for those of you that aren't familiar with us, we are the museum and art gallery based at the University of Glasgow. And in each session of Friday Focus, we will hear from a different speaker covering a different topic. We tend to look at our exhibitions and displays at our venues, as well as take a deep dive into our collections, and we look at all the research and work that goes on behind the scenes at the Hunterian and across the University of Glasgow. So today we're going to be looking at the life and work of one of the most significant printmakers in recent Scottish art history, and that is Willie Rodger. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by the artist's eldest son, Robin Rodger, who will be delivering today's talk. So Robin has prepared a presentation for us, and then there'll be time at the end for any questions. You can use the chat function to pose your questions, and I'm happy to read those out for you at the end, or you're very welcome to take yourselves off mute at the end of Robin's talk to ask your questions directly, but please stay muted for the duration of Robin's presentation. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us today, and I will hand over to Robin now to lead this talk.
Thank you very much, Eleni, and welcome everyone out there in the ether. My talk today will, I hope, be brief and will be illustrated by some of the 200 plus items which we have recently gifted to the Hunterian Art Gallery collections. My talk is broken into three parts. So firstly, an introduction to Willie's career, then a look at some of the key themes which occur in his work, and finally a bit about his printmaking techniques. The gift to the Hunterian includes editioned prints, annotated proofs, trial proofs, and preparatory studies. It follows similar gifts which we have made to other major collections, but is by far the largest and the most comprehensive holding now in public hands. The vast majority of the prints included are by the Scottish printmaker Willie Rodger. Willie was born in Kirkintilloch near Glasgow in 1930. His grandfather briefly worked in the drawing office at a local iron foundry, and Willie's mother was a trained milliner. But beyond that, there is no genetic tendency to an artistic bent within the family. Willie's decision to become an artist came early, at the age of 5. At school, a drawing by his best friend was chosen by the teacher to be hung on the wall. Willie's, in his opinion, vastly superior effort was not. Outraged, the die was cast. He would become an artist without really knowing what that entailed. Willie didn't enjoy school, but at Lenzie Academy, Bob Allison, the principal teacher of art, proved inspirational. And in the strength of a portfolio, Willie was admitted to Glasgow School of Art in 1948. Douglas Percy Bliss was the director. George W. Lennox Patterson and Ted Odling were the two tutors who introduced Willie to printmaking. He made many prints there, including a number of lithographs, an example of which is on the screen now. And this one was actually his first exhibit at the Royal Scottish Academy annual exhibition in 1955. His superb draftsmanship is already evident, and that's a feature of his work that was commented on at the time, both by his tutors and by fellow students. He graduated in 1952 with a diploma in commercial art. And it's worth remembering that this was in the days before printmakers' workshops had been established. Willie saw a gap in the market and, recognising his facility with the printmaking discipline, determined that that was the route he wanted to follow. In his postgraduate year, he was headhunted by a London advertising agency. His hopes high, he set off for London, where, as it turned out, he was to spend a very unhappy few months. The sense of loneliness and not fitting in is highlighted in the work on screen now, which shows his Spartan garret digs. Disillusioned, he returned to Scotland, unsure what to do. Back in Glasgow, he retook his higher English, incidentally at Glasgow University, and undertook teacher training at Jordan Hill, where he qualified in 1955. His first job was at Cumbernauld Village School, from where he moved back to Lenzie Academy as assistant to his former master, Bob Allison. After work, he would spend his evenings making his own art after his young family had been put to bed. 1964, when this print was made, marked an important milestone with Willie's first solo exhibition. It was held at the Citizens Theatre in Glasgow and then moved on for a showing at the Gateway Theatre in Edinburgh early in 1965. It was well received and led to Aberdeen Art Gallery purchasing a number of works from it. The race is very typical of his work at this time, with an emphasis on bright colours and pattern. The subject matter is suggested by the title, if not obviously evident from the visuals. At this point in his career, edition sizes were small and reflected the time-consuming process taken to make the print. Here, several wood blocks were cut and printed in each of the colours to create the final print. In 1966, Willie fitted out his first studio, and this gave him the chance to increase the size of his prints and also the edition size. The work on screen is one of the first from this new period. Pattern is still prominent, but experimentation is also evident, combining wood and lino, introducing found objects, and also using metallic inks. In 1967, he was invited, much to his surprise, as he had no previous experience in this field, to contribute a piece of sculpture to the International Sculpture Exhibition held in Pittencrieff Park, Dunfermline. His submission was an abstract standing figure in cement fondue, and the overall stance of that finds parallels in the key block elements of this print. So the bits that are printed in black in this print resemble that piece of sculpture. The following year, 1968, at his first attempt, he had work accepted and hung at the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition, and he was also appointed Principal Teacher of Art at Clydebank High School, where he was strongly supported by the rector, Johnny Robertson, and by the Regional Director of Art, Bill Wright, RSW. And with the full backing of these two gentlemen, in the autumn of 1971, Willie received a Scottish Arts Council funded artist's residency at Sussex University. It lasted for 3 months, gave him access to a studio and also a solo exhibition. In Brighton, he was inspired by the piers and the seafront architecture and really felt, I think, the ghost of one of his great idols, Edward Bodden, on his shoulder. After his return to Scotland, he worked up drawings that he had made in Brighton into a series of about half a dozen prints, the so-called Brighton series. And this is one of them on the screen now, which shows a part of the old Brighton pier. The black structure is literally lit up with the strings of coloured bulbs that string across it. Whereas in the past he would have cut a separate block for each of the colours, by this point in his career, he's worked out that if he creates a paper stencil, he can speed the process immeasurably. And although it's clearly inspired by an iconic piece of English seaside architecture, Willie anonymises it with the insertion of the French tricolour, which you can see, and out of screen by the inclusion also of the Scottish saltire. The Brighton series was a watershed in his development and helped establish him as a serious artist. Increasingly, he was invited to participate in both solo and group exhibitions. In 1987, he took early retirement from Clydebank High School to concentrate full-time as an artist. And 2 years later, he became the very first person to be elected to the new discipline of printmaker at the Royal Scottish Academy. In 2005, he was elevated from associate to full academician rank, and the work on screen is his diploma collection deposit, clearly inspired by the likes of Kati Kollowitz and the work of the German expressionists. And typical in Willie's approach to his art is his treatment of Eve's arm, which you can see also can be read as the serpent curling itself round the trunk of the tree and offering up the apple. Willie was a great observer of people, often putting a humorous spin on the everyday. He was self-effacing and unpretentious, and these traits are evident in this tiny print. Willie set himself the challenge of working on a small scale, relying on a craft knife as much as his traditional linocutters. By 1990, he had amassed quite a number of what became known as the Wee series. They were first shown at Ewan Mundy Fine Art in Glasgow that year, with a future outing at the Glasgow Printmakers Workshop in 1992. They were an immediate hit, and the Wee series continued to expand to over 100 images, 39 of which are included in the gift to the Hunterian. They are deceptively simple, but were actually arrived at after hours of refining sketches. In a decisive shift from the complexity of earlier works, Willie sought to pare everything down to the absolute minimum. I'll now look at some of the themes in his work. Several themes recur throughout Willie's work, including summer holidays, family, and as shown here, works inspired by the Bible. Willie was not a religious man, but had grown up being taken to church every Sunday by his father, who was significantly older than Willie, born during the reign of Queen Victoria and raised observing religion. The sermons and Bible readings which Willie was exposed to as a child fired his vivid imagination and provided the inspiration for numerous prints, as these very contrasting works from 1964 show. It's interesting to notice in the one on the right, the series of little heads, and the one at the extreme right-hand side that appears to have a crown on it, in many ways is evocative or prefigures some of the Wee series prints of quarter of a century later. Amongst the Bible stories, Adam and Eve, Susanna and the Elders, and Salome were revisited time and again as Willie grappled with more universal themes of love, deceit, misbehaviour, and violence. In keeping with the religious theme, but moving away from the Bible stories, are these two prints, which feature church buildings in Kirkintilloch. The one on the left was sketched prior to its demolition, and this is actually an annotated proof, and elements in it, like the little ring of dancing figures at the left-hand side and the tombstones at the right-hand side, ultimately did not feature in the proofed edition. On the right is a very simplified, stylized interior of the pulpit at St Mary's Parish Church in Kirkintilloch. This was the family church where Willie had sat listening to all those sermons, and it also houses 8 of the 11 stained glass windows which were designed by Willie and wrought and installed by the Glasgow trained but Germany-based John K. Clark. Another theme was the annual family holidays to Berwickshire. Willie was no sun lounger and never went anywhere without a sketchbook and pen, so even on holidays he was working. The title here relates to an aperture setting on a camera, and the patch of colour is what would be seen through the viewfinder when taking a photograph. His interest in the network of apparently abstract forms links back to works that we've seen earlier, including The Hostages and Welcome to Brighton. But in closer examination, it can be seen to be a series of windbreaks, sun loungers, deck chairs, and holiday makers. Sticking with the holiday seaside theme, a contrasting pair from 1973. The one on the left is quite representational, and note the use of the wood block to suggest beach grass. The one on the right also combines wood and lino and is looking between a blue beach hut, wooden beach hut to the left, and a red beach hut to the right, through to the breaking waves of the sea beyond. And again, this effect has been achieved by the use of a wood block. Families were another ready source of inspiration. And although this one is titled Friday Night, I should stress that myself and my siblings were washed more regularly than just one night a week. It's a very domestic scene, and it shows the 4 of us squeezed into what was a very tiny bath. The feature that I particularly like about this print, however, is the way that he has managed to capture the reflection of the bath mat and towels and the formica fascia of the bath front. In keeping with family, here are 2 very different approaches to portraiture. On the left, a very direct portrait of my younger brother, and on the right, one of my mother in her colourful dressing gown, depicted at the end of the day as she and my father would sit and catch up with the day's events. And mother was the lifelong sounding board, critic, muse, and support of Willie. Reviews of his work routinely speak of its consummate wit and strong sense of humour, and these often conceal a deeper insight or exploration into human behaviour. The look on the left is very typical of Father's approach. These 4 gormless lads obviously thought they were in for a fun night of it with this attractive young woman sitting at the left, but she clearly has the last laugh and has them firmly in their play. The right-hand work is an example of a number of works where Willie would play on the title and the subject. So taken at its base level, Hooker's green is a standard pigment colour as used in the dress, or does the title suggest that this is part of the clothing of a sex worker? And keeping with the sort of humour in his work, the left-hand work clearly suggests that there is a very strong underlying tension, even sense of hostility, emphasised by the yellowish-green skin tone, the red hair. And these two women have clearly turned up at the same event with matching hairstyles, matching lipstick, matching dresses, and are not too happy about it. At school, Willie played rugby, but he was always interested in football as an observer, and the absurdity of players, of coaching staff, and spectators alike. And despite the apparent anatomical shortcomings of some of the figures depicted here, they are actually acutely observed and very believable indeed. And both these prints show the importance of negative shapes, so the elements of the blank paper between the inked images, which were very important for Willie in terms of compositional balance and coherence. And finally, a few words about technique. The print at the left started out with Willie tearing quite freely out of black cartridge paper the shapes of the figures. And when he was satisfied with these, he transferred them to lino and cut and printed them. The architectural elements, so the pillar at the left-hand side and the platform edge at the right-hand side, were simply scraps of lino that he would pick up, from the studio floor. And this technique actually developed into a series of prints in their own right, the so-called off-cut series, that involved no cutting at all. And the earlier print at the right-hand side is one of the few examples in Willie's output where he printed directly from found objects, in this case, cardboard egg boxes. Now, that was a technique that was really exploited by one of Willie's great contemporaries and friends, Philip Reeves, but as I say, was not something that featured widely in Willie's output. And finally, two other works. The one on the left, the head was actually drawn using liquid PVA glue onto board, and the paper was then laid on top of that after it had dried and rubbed with a cloth that was soaked in a dilute, very diluted printing ink to give this frottage effect, almost like a brass rubbing. And that was a technique that he'd really first experimented with during his residency in Brighton in 1971. And on the right-hand side is a work based on a found object, but instead of printing from it, he has translated that into a woodcut with separate blocks being cut for each of the colours and printed from that. So providing a different stance, a different approach to objects. he was constantly experimenting, was constantly producing. Over 1,000 different prints are now recorded. And he would often express amazement at what he would produce in the sort of rare moments when he could stop working and take a step back, and believed that he was not actually responsible for what came out the tips of his fingers, and saw himself very much as a conduit for some greater unknown force. And that brings me, you'll be pleased to hear, to the end of my talk. I'd be happy to field any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you so much for that, Robin. It was a brief but very comprehensive talk, and a wonderful look at Willie's life and his work. If anybody has any questions, you can use the chat function, and you should be able to see a little speech bubble at the bottom of your screen to access the chat, and you can post your questions in there, or you are also welcome to unmute yourselves and ask away. Robin, I had a few questions. I know you mentioned that Willie had decided at the age of 5 that he wanted to be an artist, and always carried a sketchbook with him. But I wondered how he managed to balance his art practice whilst also being a teacher for a long while, and did that ever take a back seat at that time?
No, it's one of the sort of I don't know, wonder is the right word. I mentioned that as a pupil, he hated school, and so ending up as an art teacher seems maybe a kind of somewhat rash or illogical thing to do. But he actually enjoyed teaching. He got an awful lot from his pupils, and in many ways, I think they helped, without knowing it, to keep his interest alive, keep his experimentation alive with his printmaking. He seems to have balanced the two remarkably well, and would regard the teaching job as the means of supporting himself and my mother and his children. He was very committed to that when in the classroom, but it was very clearly a 9 to 4, Monday to Friday job. He'd come home, he'd have his tea, and he would then um, disappear and concentrate on his artwork. And as I mentioned, both his rector at Clydebank and the regional art advisor were both extremely supportive of him and encouraging him to continue with his own art. And really, without their support, he may well have ended up sticking with the teaching, and not going down the route that he did. At the end of the day, it was actually bureaucracy that made up his mind to take early retirement. He was fed up with the form filling, the box ticking. He liked the practical side of it, but not the administrative.
I'm sure a lot of teachers can also relate to that. There is a question in the chat from Anna, who has said, how much was Willie inspired by the wider developments going on in fine art, in painting rather than printmaking?
I think he was very much is often described in reviews as being a loner. And that is very untrue. He was a people person. He loved company, and he was good company. People enjoyed being with him. Um, the kind of loner element is the fact that he um, had the luxury, if you like, of having his own studio, so he didn't have to rely on sharing that space with others. In fact, I think he'd have found that challenging. Um, but there are certainly plenty of episodes in his life, um, with Edinburgh printmakers, with Glasgow printmakers, and most importantly with Peacock in Aberdeen, where he was involved in collaborative exercises with fellow artists to the benefit and enjoyment of all concerned. He was not an intellectual. He would visit exhibitions. He had a library of books that he'd refer to, but he would not sit down and sort of read up on the history of art. He didn't routinely take copies of art magazines to keep up with current trends, current fads. They were really of little interest to him. He was so productive in his own mind that he really didn't have time, I think, to be looking at what else was going on, other than in very broad terms.
Thank you, Robin. There's another question in the chat here, which says, I wonder if you can touch upon something about his wood blocks and proofs, and have they joined part of the gift that's been given to the Hunterian collection now, so researchers can access them.
That's a lovely prompt, and my apologies for having omitted that in my talk. Yes, we have gifted a small number of both lino and wood blocks as part of the gift, and they have been selected really to give a kind of overview of his different approaches to technique. So I mentioned the use, for example, of PVA on a block for printing. So there's an example of that. He also deployed sulfuric acid, so bit into the lino with acid. He would apply other agents, including flocking mordant, which is a kind of almost like the surface of velvet to print from. So there are examples of these different techniques, as well as other examples showing lino blocks that have got a pencil design drawn on but taken no further. Others where the cutting has started but he's been dissatisfied with it and put it to one side. And other ones where he's actually cut the block itself. So yes, these are, or shortly will be, available for researchers to look at.
Thank you, Robin. Just to finish, because we've just gone a few minutes over, but there's some lovely comments in the chat that I just wanted to read out. Raina has said, fascinating to hear about Willie. We were at art school together, and I think I'm the oldest living graduate of the time. So thank you, Robin. What wonderful memories you evoke, which is great. And Anne from the Hunterian has said, as the Hunterian art curator dealing with this generous gift, I would like to stress how grateful the university is for this very comprehensive gift. Willie Rodger's work are a great addition to the collections, full of potential. Personally, I really enjoy his ability to capture the essence of an object or a person, his take on life, and the wide range of emotions, situations, themes he has touched upon. And Anne very much looks forward to working on the collection. Cataloguing is about to start and exploring it with colleagues and others, which I think is a nice comment to end on. So thank you so much, Robin, for today's talk, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's been lovely to hear about Willie's work and his life. Thank you.
Thank you very much.